What is up, everyone? Today, I want to talk about Next.js and how to use it as a framework built on top of React to build both server-side rendered pages and static pages and the difference between those. And to do that, we're going to build this really cool Pokedex using the Pokemon API and Tailwind CSS to style it. So let's go ahead and dive in. All right, so here's a look at the finished example of what we're going to build. We'll have a list of all of the first 150 Pokemon. This page is a static page. So this page at build time, we'll go out and grab all the information for these Pokemon and we'll build this one page. And then the details page for the Pokemon is a dynamic server-side rendered page because in this case, we may not want to build 150 static pages. That might be too much. At some point, it's going to be too much. So in this case, we'll just do a server-side render page for the details of the Pokemon and we can navigate between these and so on. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. If you're new to the channel, I do web development tutorials every week using JavaScript, different frameworks, things like that. So if you enjoy this one, make sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so that you can get updates as new stuff comes out. All right, so we are ready to dive in. Now, I already have created a create next app already. So to do this, you can run npx create next -app. This will give you exactly what I'm starting with here. You also have the source code that I'll link in the description below that you can reference as well. All right, so to get ourselves started, let's go and just kind of look at the files that Next.js gives us. Well, by default, it gives us a pages directory and then an API directory inside of that. We don't need the API directory. We'll get into that more in future videos, so stay tuned for that. And if we look in our index.js, this is our basic page that is going to be rendered. So let's go ahead and start this up. Let's do an npm run dev. So let's go ahead and run this to show what we got. This is available to us at localhost port 3000. So if we refresh this, this is the boilerplate stuff that Next.js gives us. We're going to change the way we do a lot of this stuff. This comes with CSS modules. We're going to use Tailwind instead. So let's get rid of these styles. And I'm going to do some cleanup. So everywhere I see styles dot, I'm going to go ahead and remove that. And then I'm going to get rid of all the stuff inside of this main. And then we'll get rid of the footer as well. And then we'll be left with something a lot simpler, which is more what we want to work with. So here's kind of what we're starting with. And from here, we can go ahead and configure our project to use Tailwind. Now, I followed this article that I will leave in the description as well, so you can have a link to this. It's a pretty simple one. There's a couple of dev dependencies we need to install. So Tailwind CSS and post CSS preset env. So I'm going to paste in that. We'll go ahead and install that. And then down to the next instructions, our npm scripts are already configured because we use create next app. We already have an index page created. We don't need to start the server yet. What we can do then is run the npx tailwind init. This command will create the Tailwind config. And while this is still loading, if you're new to Tailwind, this is a CSS framework that is based on utilities first. So you get all these utility classes that you can combine to customize your application in whatever way you feel is really useful. Tailwind is really gained a lot of popularity in the last year, maybe several months. People love it. I wanted a reason to check it out myself. I think you'll enjoy what you see and hear. So I'm going to do the npx tailwind init. This will create this Tailwind config file. So that should be created for you. And then we'll need to grab or actually create a post CSS config.js file as well. So I'll copy this little snippet in here and then come over, and this will be post css.config.js and just paste that part in there. Now, the last thing we need to do is actually import, actually use the Tailwind stuff. So importing this in the appropriate place. So what we'll do is we'll copy these three imports right here, and we'll go into our styles, global styles, and I'm going to get rid of everything that's in there, paste in this new Tailwind stuff, and then go into the home module and just delete that. So now we're just sticking with our very own CSS that will be Tailwind. So if we go ahead and run this again, we should see that now our application is going to look a little bit differently because Tailwind is going to do lots of resets for us. And this text up here, this H1, should actually look a lot smaller. Okay, so this is obvious that Tailwind is taking effect because this is much, much smaller. One of the things I want to do is I want to create a components directory And inside of here, let's create a new file for a layout.js. And then I will stub this out. I'm using the React ES7 React Redux snippets. You can see a video on that. I'll link to up here if you don't have this. It's an extension in VS Code that is really, really useful for this sort of stuff. And this thing is basically just going to be a little wrapper around the stuff that we get in our pages. So we want to have a head in each one of our pages. So I'm going to copy that little snippet. So there's our head. And we want to take in a property of title that will pass to this layout. And we'll also need to import head from next head. So this will be kind of our header information. And instead of create React app, or create next app, we will just pass that the title. And then what we want is this whole thing now to basically our HTML to have a little bit of background color. So we can add a class name of, and then we'll do BG gray 300. Now, what this is in Tailwind, you can do a background of gray, and then they've got different scales that you can use in there. In this case, 300 is going to be the shade that we're going to choose. And then we'll have our main, and we'll have a few classes on this as well. Mainly, this is just going to be a container. So we'll have the container class. Then we'll say MX auto. This is like your margin 0 auto trick, which will center the content. We'll say the max width is going to be XL. And these are kind of relative. You could, a lot of these sizes, small, medium, large, XL, and so on and so on. We'll do padding top of 8. And then min h screen means we want the min height of this to be the height of the screen. And then in here, we'll pass in the children that we need to include in our props. So all this is a little wrapper layout component that we can use inside of our different pages so that we don't have to repeat the same stuff. So what we'll do in here is import layout from our layout file. And then we'll wrap all of our content with layout and pass it the title of Next.js Pokedex. And then we'll update our H1 to be Next.js Pokedex as well. And I think this should be uppercase H for head. So next/uppercase H. So see what this looks like. You can tell the stuff is the main content here, the container is centered. And then we also have this background color of the BG gray. So we see that stuff coming through. Now we can go ahead and actually style this a bit more with some of the stuff that is going to be really useful. So inside of our H1, let's go ahead and style this thing. So we want it to be text-wise a lot bigger. So we can do text-4XL. That'll be relatively big. We'll do a margin bottom of 8, and then we'll say text center. Now you can kind of see how after you get used to these Tailwind classes, you can really style things pretty quickly based on just kind of using those classes and putting them together. So we've got that. Now we need to actually go and get our Pokemon information. Now here's the cool thing with Next.js is inside of our different pages, we can export async function, 2 different types of functions to determine whether a page will be statically rendered or server-side rendered. And the first one that we'll work with is get static props. This is going to take in a context. And then in here, what we want to return is an object that has props and then something inside of those props. So by defining this async function, get static props, Next.js will know this should be a static page. Before or at build time, it will go and run this function, grab all the information from the Pokemon API that we go and grab in a second, and then pass that into the index page so that it's a fully static page by the time it gets pulled down by the user. So let's look at, let me copy this URL. Let's take this URL into the browser and just to kind of show you what the Pokemon API returns. So this is pokeapi.co/API/v2/Pokemon. And then I've got a limit parameter here of 150. This is so that we can grab the first 150 Pokemon. And inside of this results tab, you can see it returns back objects that have a name and a URL. And really here, we're just going to use the name of the Pokemon. So what we want to do is inside of this get static props, we want to go and grab all of that stuff. We'll do that using the fetch API. Fetch is kind of built into Next, so you don't have to do any sort of import for that. And then I've got a pretty cool snippet in VS Code to stub out a fetch command, surrounding it with try-catch so we can handle any errors. And what we'll do is we'll paste in that URL. So we want to get all 150 Pokemon from that URL. We'll get back that response, and then we'll get back the data. But if you look, data actually has a property called result. So we can get the Pokemon from destructuring that results property off of the data that comes back from the body. If that stuff is new, I've got a video on the fetch API that you can look at as well for figuring out how the fetch API works with getting data, especially using async await, if that is new for you as well. So the one other thing that I want is I want to, for each Pokemon on the homepage, I want to display an image, but you see we don't really have an image here. Well, there's on Pokemon.com on the Pokedex, I looked at the images here. So if I copy the image address and paste this up here, you can see that there's a URL that has a number at the end that shows which Pokemon you want to get. And these are, if you're used to Pokemon, they're 1, 2, 3, 4 through 150, the same indices or indexes that we have in the information that we just grabbed. So what I want to do is I want to take these results and augment them to include an image property that we can then use. So what we'll do is say const Pokemon equals results.map. So we're going to take each result, each individual Pokemon, or actually, I guess we can call this result. We'll get the result and the index. And then in there, we want to return a new object that has the result, all the properties of the result, all the properties of that Pokemon, as well as an image URL. So the way we get that image URL is I'm going to paste in this raw URL here and surround it with ES6 template literal strings. And we'll say const image equals, and then that string. But this is not quite right if we look at this, because we need to replace this part with the index of the Pokemon. Now, you might think you could just do this. So you might just take the index and just put it in there like that. But if we look back here, if the index is 1, that doesn't quite work. It needs to be padded with 2 zeros at the start. So what we'll do is we'll get a const padded index equals, and this may look a little weird. We're going to add 2 zeros to the beginning of the index plus 1. Now the index is 0 base, but Pokemon start at 1. So we'll just add 1 to the index, and then we'll combine that with a string of 2 zeros. So at this point, what that will return is 001 or 0010 if the index is 10, or 00100 if the index is 100. So from there, what we want to do is just grab the last 3 digits out of there. So to do that, we call .slice and pass it a -3. So this is going to add on the prefix of 2 zeros, and then whatever that string is, it's going to grab just the last 3 characters, and that should be our padded index. So let's throw this padded index into here, and we'll look in here. I think I copied this HTTPS. Yeah, so it should be the HTTPS there before Pokemon assets. So we're grabbing this image, and we're basically taking the results that we get back, which only have 2 properties, a name and a URL, and we're adding on this image property. So from here, what we want to do is let's return after this map, after we get all this data, let's just return that data to the actual component. So inside of our home component up here, we can now get the Pokemon and we can log it out. So let's log out the Pokemon. All right, so let's go back to our home page. Let's open up the console. Let's look in here. And now you can see we're getting this array of objects, and each one of these should have a image URL here. And if we copy this URL, hopefully, and get rid of those quotes, this should look like the real image. Cool. So that looks like it's working, which is pretty great. Now we can just kind of go through this in React and display each of the Pokemon in the way that we want. So underneath our title, we will have a UL, and then we'll iterate through Pokemon.map. So for each Pokemon is the singular, I guess. What are we going to return? Well, we're going to return a list item. So we'll have an LI, And each child inside of a map needs a key. So we'll use the index as the key. And then inside of that li, we want to have basically a link to the details page, if you remember that. So the way links work in Next is we need to import link from next/link. And this allows us to do client-side routing with this link. So we'll define the link here, and we'll say that href for the link is going to be /Pokemon, and then ID. So we're going to pass a query parameter of the index plus 1. So remember, the indices that come in here are array-based indexes, so they're 0-based. We need to increment that by 1 to get a relative or relevant index for our Pokemon. So we'll have that link, and then we'll close it out like this. And I think this is a little bit interesting, but you define your href inside of the link, and then you add your anchor tag inside of that. So the anchor tag itself in Next does not need the actual href itself. So inside of this anchor tag, we will have an image, and this will be a source of that image property that we added to Pokemon. So Pokemon.image. And then the alt we can have just be the Pokemon.name. All right, so we'll have the image there, and then we'll have a span with index plus 1, and then a period. So this is just kind of like the index of the Pokemon, as you would probably expect. And then we'll just have the Pokemon.name. All right, and we can, if we scroll back down, we can get rid of this console log. Oh, sorry, up here. We'll get rid of this log. And now let's see what we got. It shouldn't look great, but now you see we have all of our Pokemon. So there's all the information that we need, as well as if we hover on this, notice it's showing you the URL in the bottom left here of we will go to /Pokemon and then query parameter ID, and it's the right ID. So that looks good. Now all we need to do on this page is to style it, which with Tailwind, we just add a bunch of classes. So let's grab our anchored tag. And we want to have this have a border. We want to have a padding of 4. We want to have a border of gray. Want to have a margin Y of 2, so to give them some vertical margin between each other. And let's just look to see what that looks like. All right, so you can kind of see some of the stuff coming together. You see those classes are applying. But one of the main things we need to do is go ahead and add some styling to this image, and we can set the width to 20 and the height, or H, to 20. Now this is not 20 pixels. This is kind of the relative, I don't even know exactly what Tailwind is using here, but it's a relative to M's or Rims probably is what it is. And then I added some margin right on the image. So let's just now see what this looks like, where now it's a lot smaller. Okay, so now we're getting closer to what we want, but we want several different additional things. So we want the name of the Pokemon to be capitalized. So let's see if that's going to capitalize this Pokemon. Yep, so that worked there. So capitalize the name of the Pokemon. And then a few other things. We want to do a display of flex because we want to display the image, the number, and the name right in line. And then we'll have items center. This will vertically align the items. And then we'll say text, LG. We'll say BG, gray, 200. This will be a slightly lighter color than the background of the body. And then we'll have a rounded MD, which is just kind of a border radius. So now that actually looks pretty good. Now, the one thing we could do is add a little bit of padding to the number. So if we go down to the span, we can add in here, we can add the margin right of 2 maybe, and then a font of bold. And now look what we got. That's pretty cool. With Tailwind, just adding those classes will get us what we need. So if I try to click on one of these, it will take us to the Pokemon/ID, or Pokemon and then query parameter ID equals 1, but it says the page is not found. Well, this is where we are going to create the page for this. So inside of pages, to add a new page, you add a new file here, and this will be Pokemon.js. And then I'm going to stub this out with my RFC command. And inside of here, we're going to need to import the layout from components. layout. And we'll also want to add a link back to the home page. So we'll add a link from next/link. And eventually, this page will get the actual Pokemon as a parameter and be able to display the information about the Pokemon or Pokemon. But the thing we need to differentiate here is, if you remember, this index page is a static page. So it's grabbing all the information about the Pokemon at build time statically. And then this details page is going to be a server-side rendered page. So to tell the page to be server-side rendered, instead of get static props, we export an async function called get server-side props. And inside of here, instead of just getting the context by itself, we want to grab something called the query. Because based on that query parameter, the ID of the Pokemon, we need to then query information about that Pokemon specifically. So we can get that ID by saying const ID equals and then query.id. And from here, we'll do our little fetch snippet again. So you can type this out, obviously, if you need to. And I'm going to copy this URL. So this is now the URL to get a specific Pokemon. And you'll see in a second, when you grab a specific Pokemon, you get a lot more information about it. So the data that comes back here is a Pokemon. And we want to do kind of the same idea with the image stuff that we did before. Now we could create a helper function in here and do this if we wanted to. But I want to grab the padded index. So for this Pokemon, I want to grab the padded index. And this thing will be the ID +1. So we get that ID from the query parameter. And actually, this does not need to be, this should be the regular ID. This is not 0 base, so we don't need to add one there. So we'll grab the padded index, and then we'll grab the image again. So that same little snippet, we'll use the padded index in there. And then we'll just say Pokemon.index or .image equals image. And lastly, we need to return our props in here. So return props, and then inside of props, we'll pass the Pokemon. And the only reason I'm specifying Pokemon is just like singular versus plural. This page maybe should have been Pokemon, but the routing would be mixed up and so on, whatever. So hopefully, if we now log the Pokemon up here, we'll see the actual information for that Pokemon. So let's come back and refresh and see the log here. Hopefully, we see all the information about this user, or about the Pokemon coming through here. And now we just need to display it to wrap up this little Pokedex in Next.js. So inside of here, let's use our layout component. And this will have a title of Pokemon.name. And then now we'll want to start to add all the details. So we'll start with the title, right? We'll have an H1, and this will have a class name. And you'll see the same Tailwind stuff again. Text-4XL, MB2, text, center, and capitalize. And this will be the Pokemon.name. All right, so there's our title. Then we want the image. So we'll have an image with a source of Pokemon.image like we had before. The alt would be Pokemon.name again. And then we want to have some classes on the image as well. So let's do a class name of, and we just want to be able to automatically kind of center this thing. So we'll have an MX of auto. And we can get rid of the log here. Let's see if that image is coming through. Okay, this should be a bigger image. Yeah, so that's a pretty good size image there. So we got the name, the image, and then we'll just add a little bit of some of the properties of the Pokemon. So we'll have a p tag here, and then a span with a class name of font bold, and then MR2, so a little bit of margin to the right. And we'll say this is going to be the weight. And so this will be the Pokemon weight. And I'm going to copy that line and do the same thing for the height. All right, so there's two little pieces of information. Hopefully those show up okay. Weight, and did I misspell height? Maybe I did. Yep, lowercase height. So that should be looking good now. And then the only other thing, or a couple of things I was going to add is an H2 with a class name of text to XL, so a little bit smaller than the bigger one, and then margin top of 6 and margin bottom of 2, and this will be for our types. And then the types in here, the information is a little bit kind of convoluted. You see types is an array of objects that have a property of type. Inside of that, it has a name. A little bit convoluted, but what we want to do is take our Pokemon and call types.map, and we'll get each type as well as the index. And then what we'll return is a p tag, and we want to show the type.type.name. I know this seems a little convoluted. It does to me too. But we'll make sure that we have a class name, or actually a key for each one of these of index. And I'm missing a parenthesis there. Let's see if that will autocomplete for us. And so let's just see if that gives us our height should fill in. Then we got our types, grass and poison. Cool, that works. And the last thing I want to do is I'll add a p tag with a class name of margin top 10 and text center. And then I want to have a link in here. So this will be a link with an href to home. And then inside of there, we'll have our anchor tag with no href. Again, that's a little weird in Next.js to me, but that's how it works. And this will have a few classes as well. Text to XL and underline. And then we'll just say home. So this should be our last little bit here. If we load this up and see our home page, we can go back to home. Notice all of that at this point is still doing client-side routing, which is pretty sweet. And we'll click on Bulbasaur. We'll get those details. We'll click on my favorite Pokemon, which is Charizard. There's those details, and so on and so on. So to me, this is a pretty cool one. It's Pokemon. How can you argue with that? So it's kind of a fun demo, but this shows some really powerful stuff in Next.js where you can combine statically generated pages, static pages, like this index page, with dynamic or server-side rendered pages, which are going and grabbing information at real time, at request time. When a user requests this page, we go and grab the information about that Pokemon and return it back. Now, in theory, we could take all of this information and have it kind of static inside of a JSON file or something, so we don't have to make an API request. But just to kind of show you the cool mix of static versus server-side rendered, I thought this was a pretty cool example. Now, one last thing I want to show you is you can run an npm run build, and this will go through the build process and generate these static as well as server-side rendered pages. And I want to show you how Next will kind of let you know which is which here in a second. All right, so this finished building, and notice that they show you a little symbol. Here's the symbol for a server-side rendered page. Here's the symbol for a static page, automatically rendered as static HTML, uses no initial props. Then they also have statically generated HTML with the get static props. So if you remember, we use get static props in our index page. So it has this little icon here, which means statically generated, as well as /Pokemon now shows you that it's a server-side rendered page with that little kind of serverless icon there. I think this is super cool. Next.js is really, really powerful to be able to combine these two things. The combination of these, in my mind, I'm going to use Next.js a lot going forward. Probably not using Create React App, and maybe even not using Gatsby for a lot of things going forward. Next.js is super cool. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you've ever used Next.js before, if this video made sense, and what you might want to see built with Next.js in the future. As always, thanks for checking out the video. If you enjoyed it, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.